I'm a strong believer that right now is the best time to understand Yu-Gi-Oh! Card rulings. Not only do we have a ton of different helpful websites and Facebook groups only discussing rulings, problem-solving card techs, a new thing that was added 5 years ago to the game, really helped make cards a lot easier to understand, and we don't really have to have a bunch of ambiguous cards talking about like, oh, which part of it is the cost and which part of it is the effect and which parts can you negate. Problem-solving card text for the most part has cleared almost all of that up. However, one thing that I noticed on my Egyptian God video, which I posted last week and currently has over 100,000 views, is that a lot of people simply don't understand many of the rulings and situations surrounding the God cards. And that's totally fine. I get that a lot of people that watch the video maybe haven't played the game in a long time, or maybe they misread the card. And in today's video, I'm going to go through the most commonly misrepresented parts of those God cards that people seem to really have trouble with, and kind of debunk them and tell you how you can learn from these rulings and apply them to other rulings. Because I totally understand getting rulings wrong. I think we've all gotten some rulings wrong. However, one thing I always try to tell people is to make sure to not get the same ruling wrong twice. Because you can't possibly know every interaction before it happens, but you can kind of prepare and sort of apply different rulings to other situations, which makes understanding the game a lot easier the more cards you actually look at. The first one that came up the most often was how many life points can Winged Dragon of Ra pay? A lot of people thought that Winged Dragon of Ra could pay any number of life points. I mean, they thought he could pay anywhere between how many life points you have and down to 100. Thought like if you had 8,000 life points and you summon him, oh, well, that means you can now, you can just pay 4,000 and he has 4,000 attack. That's not how the card works. It's never worked that way. Maybe in the anime or in an old video game it worked that way, but in the actual real life version of the card, never been that way. So what does this card say? It says with the most updated text, when this card is normal summoned, you can pay life points that you only have 100 left, this card gains attack and defense equal to the amount of life points paid. What do the colons and the semicolons mean? Well, basically that's problem-solving card text. So the before the colon stuff is what requirements you have to meet to trigger this effect. So it has to be when it's normal summoned. After the colon and before the semicolon, that's the cost. So the cost of this is paying the life points. And then if all of that stuff is met and resolves properly, you get the effect, which is after the semicolon. What can we learn from reading this card? Well, we can learn that it only activates when it's normal summoned. And we can learn that you have to pay life points so you only have 100 left. You don't have to read that effect in different ways. It's pretty clear on the card. It's not saying you can pay some of those life points. No, it's literally just read the card. You can pay life points so you only have 100 left. And as many commenters have pointed out, yes, it is completely optional. However, it is completely optional in that it is an all or nothing effect. So you can either pay all of your life points except 100, or you can pay nothing and tribute 3 monsters for a 0 attack monster that's effect at best is paying 5,000 life points for the same thing that you could have done with Regeki. That's pretty crazy, and I didn't even think I had to mention that. I'm referring to the fact, or in that video I was referring to the fact that there'd be no reason to actually go through the trouble of summoning this thing unless you were doing the sort of attack gaining effect, which is why I didn't think it was necessary to mention that. Of course, the can means that the payment is optional, but not in the way that a lot of people thought it was, where the payment amount was optional. It's just whether you're going to do it or not. We can look at some other examples of this. I think a great one is Bark of the Dark Ruler. This card says, if a Fiend type monster you control battles during the damage step, pay life points, and then in parentheses, in multiples of 100 points, then target the opponent's battling monster. That opponent's monster loses that much attack and defense until the end of this turn. That's another situation where you can pay a lot of life points, but you don't have to pay all of your life points. You just pay them in multiples of 100. And I think the reason Winged Dragon of Ra gets so mixed up here is because it's gaining attack. Because if we look at another card that many of you are probably familiar with, like Backs to the Wall, you would never assume, even though this has the same exact text as Winged Dragon of Ra, that you wouldn't have to pay all your life points. Because Backs to the Wall says, pay life points so you only have 100 left. Special summon as many 6-star monsters with different names from your graveyard as possible. And then some other stuff as well. But the main text there is exactly the same as Winged Dragon of Ra, and no one's going to read Backs to the Wall and say, oh, you can only pay 2,000, that's fine. No, you read that and say, oh, you have to pay all of them except 100. Winged Dragon of Ra is the exact same. And like I said, I think the reason people get confused about this is because it gains attack. You really can't look at that part. You just have to read the card, play it how it is. We can just see in general, you have to do what cards say. If they don't say up to, then you have to destroy 2. So we can look at a card like Icarus Attack. You target 2 cards on the field and destroy them. That means you have to target 2. Compared to a card like Heavy Storm Duster that says target up to 2 spells or traps on the field and destroy them. That one can destroy just 1. It obviously can't destroy 0. This is different though from Pokemon. I don't know if you play the Pokemon TCG, but in the Pokemon TCG, if something says a number, it does in fact just mean as many as possible. You don't have to do the top number exactly, which is a little bit different and actually pretty confusing if you're coming from Yu-Gi-Oh! Going to Pokemon. Now the next thing that's on this list is going to be Obelisk. Now what ruling came up with Obelisk a lot? Well, in that video I mentioned that Obelisk wasn't very effective because commonly played cards such as Kaijus and Dark Hole and Mirror Force and Torrential Tribute, well, once again, not Torrential Tribute when the Obelisk is summoned, but when something else is summoned, all those cards can out Obelisk, making it not very effective at being this big giant monster that's unkillable. And a lot of people were confused with that. So here's a really cool thing in one of the best editions of problem-solving card text. So I think the actual best addition from problem-solving card text that clarified a lot of things is that everything before the semicolon and colons, that's all like costs and activation requirements. That was super helpful, so we didn't have to ever wonder what was the cost of cards. But the other really important thing, and you can see that in relation to Obelisk, and this simplifies it so much, it's really great. So every single card that targets uses the word target. No, it's actually that simple. I know that sounds like an oversimplification, and you might be saying, well, but what about in this situation? This feels like this card should target. Like Artifact Morale Talk kind of feels like it should maybe target stuff. If it was printed or reprinted after problem-solving card text came out, which was like way back in 2011 or 2012-ish, if it was printed or reprinted after that date, no, if it doesn't say target, it simply does not target. So Dark Hole, can't find target anywhere on the card. Torrential Tribute, can't find target. Mirror Force, can't find target. Kaijus especially confuse a lot of people. A lot of people seem to think, oh, you're targeting the card that you're tributing. That's simply not the case. So if the card does not say target, it does not target, which I think makes it really easy for players to pick up. You don't have to wonder, like back in the day, there were cards like Karma Cut that said like select, and it's like, does that mean target? They got rid of those words. It's just, if it says target, it targets. It's that simple. So hopefully that clears some things up. The last thing I want to mention is just like a whole bunch of questions related to not reading these cards. The most updated text for every single card in Yu-Gi-Oh! Is on the Yu-Gi-Oh! Database online, or you can just look at the newest printing, although sometimes there's some problems there where like the card hasn't been reprinted yet, but they've updated the text. So if you go to the website, Yu-Gi-Oh! Database, you will always find the most updated text for any card. And man, a lot of people I think people were looking at the anime effects of these cards, or they were just thinking that they were actually how they played them like back when they were a kid. But you can read the entire effect on the card. So some common ones I saw were like, I mean, the raw thing obviously, but I can see how that'd be confusing. Some people thought that you could like just tribute 2 monsters for these cards. Some people thought you could use Ra's effect on your opponent's turn to destroy cards. That's not true. Just a whole bunch of really confused commenters talking about just adding effects to these cards that simply are not on there. So I just wanted to let you guys know that all sort of updated card text are available online for free. You can just go out there if you have any questions and then look at that and say, okay, is this effect that I thought was on this card? Is it actually on the card? And many times the answer is no. Now, just to clear some things up from some other comments I saw, the God cards have never been banned. They also have never been errated. So a lot of people were saying, oh, well, the Obelisk used to be just unaffected by everything. That's actually not true at all. Ever since they've had sort of their initial legal release, they have never been errated other than to be switched to problem-solving card text or to clarify some things, but they've always done the same thing. So back in the day, there were unplayable copies that simply had the flavor text in their text instead of a real effect. Those cards were unplayable and really didn't even describe any effects at all, so we can't even use those for reference. But ever since these cards were printed, they have done the exact same thing, which I think is worth noting because you might be misremembering some things. I saw a couple comments. I didn't even screenshot them. Sorry, I went through like so many comments to get the comments for this video, but I did see a couple comments saying like, oh, well, my copy of Winged Dragon Ra doesn't have to pay all of your life points and stuff like that. And that's simply not true. It's very likely that you have an older fake copy, or that once again you're misremembering or misreading it, and that's perfectly fine. But none of these cards have ever been errated to change their effects. They've only been errated to clarify their effects, and they've always done these sorts of things. Now, I will say in the video games, they were different, but the video games aren't official card text for cards. A lot of times they have their own custom ban lists, or they have weird release dates within the game. So you can't use the video games for like a ruling resource or a card text resource. I'd heavily advise against doing that. Lastly, I want to just quickly mention some comments I got about not including Winged Dragon of Ra Sphere Mode in there. People were arguing with me because I made the pinned comment of that video talking about how I don't feel that that card's actually God support. What I mean by that, or what I meant by that, was that people that are playing Sphere Mode in competitive or rogue decks are not playing Sphere Mode because it's a God card. They're not playing Sphere Mode because it can summon Winged Dragon of Ra from the deck. That's not why anyone that's even remotely competitive plays that card. They play it because it's basically a big lava golem or a big kaiju monster. So that's why I didn't include it in the video, because that card and Mound of the Bound Creator and Ra's Disciple, which I did mention in that video, none of those cards actually make the God cards playable. It's kind of like Mecha Phantom Beast Dracosac existing and being $150 during Dragonlore format. That doesn't suddenly mean that people can look at that and say, well, Mecha Phantom Beast Dracosac is like played in the best deck, therefore Mecha Phantom Beasts are good. No, it just means that that card is good. Ra Sphere Mode is a good card, but no one's really playing it to bring out Ra. But I think that's going to wrap up this video. I covered a lot of different rulings that I wanted to cover. This wasn't really meant to call anyone out, because like I said, it's perfectly fine to get a ruling wrong once. Just make sure you don't get it wrong in the future. But hopefully you learned something in here, even if these things weren't that confusing to you. Maybe that this can be applied to other rulings that you might have been on the fence about. And yeah, I'll see you guys later. Bye.